Hard work is not all glory and applause. It takes tedious tasks and mundane missions to hold work that matters together. That's where executive assistants come in. They are the unsung heroes of the office, though we're trying to give them a little bit more recognition. No one understands this better than the team behind the all-in-one software application for EAs, Cabinet. Cabinet was created for high-performing executive assistants who are streamlining processes, creating culture, and preventing burnout, all before lunch. Discover why EAs at Fortune 500 companies are turning to Cabinet to help them handle complex calendars and manage their never-ending to-do lists. Go to joincabinet.com and use Start Your Free Account. Welcome to Reach, your platform to connect with other executive assistants and acquire game-changing knowledge and perspective. Reach is designed to inspire your workday, guide you through pivotal moments in your career, and transform you into the executive assistant you've always wanted to be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reach. This is your host, Jessica Van, founder and CEO of Maven Recruiting Group. And today I am joined by Kristine Valenzuela. Welcome, Kristine.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you.
So good to meet you.
It's really good to meet you. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you are a regular Reach listener, then you know that we've spent quite a bit of time discussing how to gain buy-in from your executive. But what about everyone else that you need buy-in and information from on a day-to-day basis to do your job effectively? People like your executive's direct reports or people in finance or other C-suite team members. Kristine has graciously offered to tackle this topic of basically how to get that broad buy-in and how you as an executive assistant can really telescope your value beyond just what you do specifically for that individual, but actually, how you provide value and how you influence at a broader level. And ultimately, the idea here is how do you as an EA really create good PR around yourself and your role? Because I think a lot of what we're trying to discuss today and try to get at the heart at is, how to gain broad buy-in around your value and what you do. So before we jump in, just to give a quick highlight around Kristine's background. For the past 11 years, she has worked both as an executive assistant and a chief of staff in industries as varied as aerospace to software development. She's starting a new role as an executive assistant at Atlassian. And fun fact, this isn't even her first podcast. This is, I think, your second, maybe?
It's my third.
Oh, your third? Oh my God. You're nipping at my heels here. Good for you. So I think, given the context of you starting a new role on Monday, I think this is actually so apropos and fitting because you're going to be doing this exact thing, right? Joining a new company, getting buy-in, establishing good PR for yourself, building a brand, building recognition so that you can ultimately do your job in the best way possible. So this could not be more timely. So to begin, I'd love to have you paint a picture for our listeners around some of the scenarios or situations that executive assistants often encounter that make it really essential for you to have, effective collaboration and cooperation across departments, right? What are the situations that come up? What are the information needs and, necessities that you encounter that you need to gather in order to do your role effectively?
Wow. That's a pretty long list. To do the job effectively, though, it's not so much about having specific hard skills. It's more about the soft skills and knowing how to engage with other people. The thing that comes to mind, and it always stands out when I hear and read about other people, is the concept of servant leadership. And I think it pertains to you, whether you're an EA or whether you're a CEO, that it's all about approaching people with the mindset of, how can I help you? Let's just say you need to engage with someone on doing something. The question might be, how can I make this easier for them? Or the best thing is this even a good time? Because sometimes if you need to get things done, you've got to be able to, it's really important to be able to read the room and have a high level of discernment. That's at least half the battle when you're trying to get anything done. So you've got to lead with those things before you even start engaging with the tactical skill.
I mean, that totally makes sense to me. I think coming from a place of I'm here to provide value. I'm here to make things better. I'm here to improve things. Is a great framework to operate from. Sometimes there are just, necessities, right? That you encounter, maybe you're putting together a board deck, or maybe there's a certain project that your executive has tasked you with that requires you to work cross-functionally or unilaterally across the org. So I'm curious, like if you've ever been in those types of situations where you've needed information from somebody to make something happen, and perhaps where you faced some level of resistance, or you were told, oh, Kristine, this is above your pay grade, or this information is on a need to know basis and you don't need to know it, or something along those lines that it created kind of an impediment or roadblock to you getting what you needed to do your job.
I always start with giving people proper perspective on what's going on. I think the wrong way, and this pertains to people in our field or any field really, the wrong way to approach it is to go in there and say, I need this, I need it now, just do it, or some version of that. I always try to give people some context of, this is why I need it. It's being used for this. I dislike going into situations where that's not, I don't like it when people come to me and they don't give me the context. So I'm really, really big on giving people the context. It stemmed from this meeting. We have this, you've got to paint the picture that you are capable of putting this together. You're just needing the data to put it together. So context is a really big thing. As for people that sometimes are reluctant, I can only think of one time that I've ever run into that. Usually I have a pretty easy time with even the most difficult of people, but I can only think of one instance where it's ever happened where somebody really did not want to work with me. I was a new chief of staff, and although my boss, who was the chief revenue officer, had informed his team of my role and what I was there to do, there was one guy who always insisted on talking to my boss instead of me. And in fact, he got downright mad about it. But I just never took that personally. I'm not sure if it was because I was a woman or if because I wasn't an executive colleague, but his ego was not going to let him engage with what he viewed as a lower level employee. And I saw that right away. So it kept me from getting upset about it. And then, before and after the situation happened, I reviewed it with my boss, with HR, and I even had access to a leadership coach for our department. And I got confirmation that I checked all the right boxes. So I felt good about how I approached it and what I said. And at the end of the day, that saying, it's not you, it's me. This was definitely a problem with him on his end. I didn't take it personally.
How did you ultimately, I'm assuming you eventually got that person's buy-in. How did you manage to do that?
I had to stand by, okay, I'm here to do a job. This is not about faltering here. So I just I kept engaging. I kept talking. I kept reinforcing. I kept asking questions, as I would with anyone that might be deemed difficult to work with. I just would engage over and over and keep that dialogue open. And sometimes, if I saw an avenue where I thought I could add a more personal touch, I did.
I think the first tip that you gave as well around, providing context and always leading with the context is really a good one. Most people, it's like there's that, Simon Sinek who always says, start with why. And
Yes.
I think there's a lot of truth to that for the most part, when people understand where the request is coming from, why it's significant, what the impact is, why it's important, there's a lot fewer questions and there's a lot less resistance. I think it's just kind of an easier way to get and gain cooperation.
Absolutely.
So you touched on this, and it's a nice segue to something I wanted to bring up, which is that, I think that there can be, to my dismay, and I think the dismay of a lot of our listeners, there can be just kind of some stigma attached to this role. I don't know why. And I think that we've waged a pretty awesome campaign to combat that stigma. But I think that that there are definitely there can be politics at play in certain organizations or amongst certain executives or individuals where they might not see the executive assistant as empowered as he or she really is, right? And
Right.
Because of that, I think there can be politics, there can be dismissiveness, there can be, as you had faced, no, Kristine, I'm not giving you this information. Like, I'm going to go above you. I'm going to go to your executive directly, right? We wish it didn't happen, but we know that it does. And, it's interesting because I had on our program a couple of months ago, we had on Kenya Graham and Lisa Magazine, who together were the executive assistant and personal assistant, respectively, to Sarah Blakely, who is the founder of Spanx. And at the end of our program, I think we were not recording at that point, but Lisa asked me, she said, do people still get into this career? And, do you think that people get into this career because they choose it? Or do you think they get into it because they kind of fall into it and don't really know what else to do and it just sort of happens? Or do you think that there's like a conscious choice? And she asked me, how are EAs perceived? And, as somebody who's just recently retired, I think she's kind of like asking in terms of like the next generation of EAs, right? Like, how are current EAs right now perceived? And it's an interesting question because I think that there really is this issue around perception and this issue around brand and PR for the EA role, which is a big reason why we wanted to do this episode is, how can EAs really like reclaim and manage, how they are perceived. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this as somebody who's been an EA for quite some time, as well as a chief of staff. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think sometimes, not always, but sometimes executive assistant roles have less cachet than other positions? Why do you think it is that sometimes people have a harder time understanding their value and what they do?
Well, first I'm going to say I listened to that episode you were talking about. Those ladies were total rock stars. I loved every minute of it. It was so great. They had so much good information.
Oh my God, I love them. I wanted to teleport myself to Atlanta where they were and just like join their little martini party.
Right? That's the first thing I thought of. I'm like, I want to get a happy hour with them. Like they would have so many good stories. Yeah.
Oh my God, they were fascinating. They were fascinating to talk to, and just so coming from such a good place, like a place of just like Absolutely. Authenticity and really mutual respect for each other. But anyway, go ahead. As you were saying.
So it's such a big, important question. I mean, I could talk about this probably for the entire length of this podcast, but how are we perceived? There is still a stereotype, right? Stereotypes die hard. I mean, it takes a long time, decades really, to change the stereotype, but it also takes people talking about it and being vocal and putting it out there. But the reason those stereotypes don't die hard is because we have jobs that operate in the background in most companies. when your role involves making someone's life easier or quote unquote, just getting stuff done, almost no one sees the skill that's involved in doing that every day. So it's impossible for people to understand our value. We're the only ones that really know what we do, right? Usually our bosses have the most exposure to our capabilities, but even then, only part of it is visible to them. They can be asking for something as minor as, hey, let's reschedule that meeting. And little do they know that can be a major rabbit hole that can take not just time, but a lot of finesse. And there's a million things like that, that seemingly innocuous tasks that are, there have been many times when it's taken me 2 to 3 hours to do something like easy, reschedule a meeting. But you know what? There's so much behind that. And even kind of getting back to the question, even for myself, I've wondered why so few people see the full extent of my capabilities. And all I can attribute it to is that people in our position tend to fulfill, we do a lot within our jobs for ourselves, but we tend to fulfill singular needs for other people. An example of this would be, all the times I've helped people with Excel formulas. So they see me as an Excel expert. So they keep coming to me to help with Excel, but they might not have me help out with anything else. Maybe someone might know I'm the person who has the latest staffing numbers. And so I'm the go-to for the staffing information, right? Someone else might see me as a project manager and they're like, hey, what's the latest on this project? And then you become the source of information for that. But almost never do people see us as the source of all these things put together, in this amalgamation of all the things that we do. And so that's kind of why we have to start talking about it. We have to have this dialogue. We need to explain to people how much, our roles have changed over the years. There's just so many people that are, and through no fault of their own, really, they're stuck in that Mad Men era and they pigeonhole us as a calendar keeper or a typist or, whatever it is that they think, or, a coffee fetcher. We might do all that too, right? But not just that. And our perception in general is good, but it's not great yet. We're seen as capable contributors, but it's that stereotype is hard to kill. We do so many things. And again, because of that background, nobody sees it. Not long ago, I actually came up with a list of close to 10 different roles that I've fulfilled when I've worked as an EA throughout my career. And how many people can say that they do the work of 10 other professions? I don't think I can't. Maybe this is my tunnel vision here, but I can't think of any other roles where that might happen. It's changed so drastically over the years. And more so when you work in a C-suite or as a chief of staff. But it's hard to change that perception because no one, and I'm glaring really hard at the HR people right now.
Okay.
No one steps back to rescope their expectations of the position. And then internally, not enough people are elevating our value within the leadership team. So that's why, podcasts like yours are so critical. And, there have been a lot of great articles that have been publicized. I know there was one recently where they talked about EAs, chief of staffs making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year. And, at least it gets people talking about what we really do. And that, yes, there are some executives that put a high value on our contribution.
Exactly.
But the bulk of it is we still have a long way to go. We've got to start talking about all the things that we do and talking about it as a whole, not just being the Excel expert or, the staffing person, the person that knows about staffing or the person that knows about projects. We've got to paint the full picture.
Yeah. I think I read the same article. Was it the one in the Wall Street Journal recently?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It talked about, executive assistants being $400,000 contributors and how, quality support has never been more critical or essential,
Right.
it would seem, than now. And they talked about, these ultra high net worth figures and how they need somebody that can really run the gamut from like, fetching whatever low level task to, whatever, navigating a highly sensitive, situation with the board or whatever the case may be. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think that speaks volumes, right? I mean, follow the money, right? I mean, if people are willing to compensate at that level, it would suggest that they assign a certain level of value and importance to that individual to where they're paying them at an executive level compensation. And yet there is this divide that exists sometimes between perception and reality. And I think it's so interesting, like the example that you gave, Kristine, of, rescheduling a meeting. So some people in its most simplistic sense say, okay, well, yeah, really? Somebody pays you that much money to schedule?
Right. And they roll their eyes at that.
They roll their eyes. They go, I could do that. But it's like, it's missing the point, right? It's missing all of the intricacies and sensitivities and the elaborate web that is likely involved around that event, around that incident, around that meeting. What are the reverberations? What are the sensitivities amidst that relationship? Are there sensitivities that we need to be mindful of? Is it going to impact the business priorities in certain ways? And what is the domino effect there? Exactly. And how are we going to triage that? And, oh, by the way, we know that this person's already feeling, disgruntled about X, Y, and Z. So if we push this off, and it's like, this is a whole level of context that informs how a good EA makes those decisions and navigates those things.
Right. And all the skill involved with doing something as simple as rescheduling. I mean, there's a lot of skill involved in that.
100%. And that's just like one tiny piece of the equation. So I agree. I think that, it's so important that everybody that's in this business and in this industry and in this profession, is aligned on our objective and purpose around, communicating the importance of this work. And I think that, your being here and just, these types of episodes are really, really, really helpful for that. So to go with that, to take that to, I guess, another level, how can executive assistants, up level themselves, right? So if you're dealing with a stigma situation, if you're dealing with somebody who, has a certain narrative around, oh, an EA, that's just a glorified schedule. I can't believe they get paid XYZ amount of money, right? How do you begin to change that narrative? How do you begin to debunk that stereotype? You mentioned one strategy that, with this one difficult person that you encountered of just being, consistently kind, present, not getting deterred by their, kind of whatever rudeness. But what other tactics and strategies can people employ? Because I know that there's a number of listeners out here who are feeling marginalized, who are feeling frustrated that they're not able to get the answers or cooperation that they need.
This is such a good question. I'm a big fan of just staying informed about what you do, whether you're an EA or your career is something completely different. It's important to stay on top of your profession and research, and research what's happening. What are people talking about? I will be the first to admit that I just came across, your podcast, a couple of other EA podcasts earlier this year. And I'm being honest. I'm a little ashamed to say that it took me so long. I think, I don't know. I think we're the kind of people that we just put our head down and we work. We focus on doing our job. And I never even thought until earlier this year to start looking at resources. Like I think what part of what it was is I was having a little bit of imposter syndrome, and I thought, am I maybe not as good as I think I am? Like, did I peak a long time ago? Am I on the other side of that bell curve? And so I'm like, I need to research like my profession. I need to see, I need to see what other people are doing. What are, celebrity EAs doing? And so I kind of sent me down this rabbit hole of a Google research. And that's when I came across all these podcasts. And what has been helpful is listening to the podcast, and then for me participating in them. I'm learning to talk about elevating ourselves as EAs, as chiefs of staff, and improving. I want to improve on that over time. And then what I'm able to do is take that dialogue, and then I'm using it to engage with other people, whether that's my boss, whether that's HR, and in my case, I'm starting a new job on Monday. I've have been able to use that dialogue during interviews to start talking about, why it's important to, they always ask that question, how much, it goes back to the pay, how much do you want to get paid? And it's nerve wracking when you're interviewing for a job, because you don't want to pay, you don't want to get yourself out of the interview before you even start. But then, there's that part of, well, you know what, this is what I need to get paid. And, as a matter of fact, it really should, this is the bare minimum, and it should be this instead, because of the value we bring to the C-suite. Circling back to that article and some of these EAs being paid like executives, that's exactly where my head is, because I see the value we bring to the C-suite. One of the questions that I think I probably even used this in an interview was, how often can, say, a CEO go to one of their executives and say, give them some random task, the most random thing possible, ask your CFO to do some random thing, and he or she would be like, no, I'm busy. Whereas, we're the ones that are like, okay, yeah, give it to me, and we get it done, and with a smile, and we do this all day, every day. And there's value in that. And yeah, should we be paid more? We get paid a fraction of what our bosses do, a fraction. And considering the value we bring and all the things that we can do that other executives maybe can't, they're more focused on one or two things. And, our bandwidth is so wide, we should be paid appropriately for that.
It's also helpful to consider. So I agree. Like there's a versatility here, and there's like the EA as utility player is for sure, I think, like definitely one paradigm of this role, where EAs are just sort of deployed, to whatever task it might be. It could be running an implementation. It could be, onboarding an executive. It could be structuring the board meeting. I mean, it could be any number of things, right?
Onboarding executives. That's a key factor right there. Like we're asked to onboard executives, right?
Yeah. A lot of times. Yeah, absolutely. But I think too, like, when it comes to how do you elevate and raise your brand, I think that there's a lot to what an EA does. We all know that, but how do we, like, what strategies can others use to get that buy-in from people that may be less inclined toward them? And I think part of it too is using your power for good, right? So I think that a lot of times, and I hate to say it, but it's kind of like, a lot of things, especially in business, they trade on favors, they trade on, kind of social capital, and what's going to work for them. So I think like you as an executive assistant are in a very advantageous position in many senses, in that you are able to help gain, the ear of an executive. You're able to help massage the schedule. You're able to help get important things in front of your executive that those other people need at certain points, right? It behooves them to cooperate with you, because by being cooperative with you, well, then you can also help influence positive things on their behalf. Or, hey, I really need to get so-and-so's attention on this, or I'm this is really critical. We're in a tough spot with XYZ decision. I need a whatever. I need a feedback on this, or I need a decision on this. I mean, I think also playing up your role in that sense can be a really useful strategy for gaining buy-in. Because when people start to see, oh, wow, Kristine is really influential in this way, or Kristine really had my back on this. And thanks to Kristine doing X, Y, and Z, I was able to get whatever they need and whatever they care about done. Right. So I think, like, and again, going back to what you first said about context, like, that's why it's so important to know, how do all the puzzle pieces fit together? Who needs what from who at any given point? And if you can help, nudge that along, then I think you are constantly building good social capital for yourself, and hopefully amassing more than you're burning, with what you're asking in return.
Yeah. And when you start talking about context, I mean, that's kind of really the gateway to building your personal brand, because, and it starts with something small like that, because if people only see you as a tactical, with all these tactical tasks, and if that's all you do for other people, you're just going to further the stereotype a bit, and by doing things and giving context, you have a chance to build your brand, right? And I hate to think of myself as a brand, but it's PR for the position, we'll say. When you give them context, you're telling them that you know what's going on. You're explaining how all these different pieces of the business fit together. And that's when they start understanding, oh, wow, hey, she knows what she's talking about. I can, maybe I can go chat with her about this. And then you build on that. And then, I had a long time job where I, worked with a team of EAs, and, there were always those EAs that you would ask them a question and they're like, I don't know. It's not my job. I was given this, I'm passing it along. And it's like, that's not the that's not the right approach. Right, and so I use those examples to then improve upon, right? And just say, all right, I don't want to be that person that says, I don't know. I could shrug my shoulders all day, but is that the right thing? If someone's really trying to do their job, the right thing is to give them context. Well, we're doing this because of this, and that came from this conversation, and the problem there was this, and this, and you start connecting all the pieces. And I've had a lot of good luck just giving context, and people start coming to me with lower level problems, and then they start coming with bigger problems. And there was one time a job that I had, someone came to me, and he was like, I'm not going to give his name, but he was kind of like a bratty little brother to me. Had a very large personality, we'll say. Anyways, he came to me one time, and he was genuinely panicked, which was not a way that I saw him. I almost never saw him like that. And he came, and just the look on his face, like I knew something was wrong. He's like, I have this big meeting. He's like, these are all the people that are involved. He's like, I don't get involved with these meetings. Like, my meetings are all engineering related, and I don't know what to do. Can you help me? Like, what am I supposed to talk about? And it was a meeting with the CEO, with the president, all the senior level VPs. And I'm like, look, these two people, you don't need to sell them on anything. They already love you. Don't worry about them. I was like, you've got the finance guy. Integrate some finance numbers. That'll make him happy. You've got the manufacturing guy. He's really big on precise data. So make sure if you're using data that pertains to his department, that you get it directly from his office, because he does not want to see even a half a percentage point off of what that true number is. So I was like, call Kimberly and have her give you the latest information. And then there's these other people's, you just want to acknowledge them and give them love. Don't tell them what to do or what your hopes and wishes are for their department. Just speak to them factually. And this was like a 5-10 minute conversation. Like I just rattled all this stuff off, and I'm like, look, don't sweat it. I was like, you're the man, that, like, just do that. Like, keep it high level. They aren't expecting you to deep dive into some engineering problem or whatever. I was like, keep it high level, like give everyone some love, and that's it. So I sent him on his way. A couple days later, he circled back. He's like, I just wanted to thank you, which he wasn't the kind of person that thanked people. He's like, I just want to thank you. And I have to tell you that the CEO pulled me aside and said that was the best meeting he's ever seen me participate in. That was the best presentation he's ever seen me give. And he's like, so I just had to thank you. He's like, because if it wasn't for your advice, I would not have done so well. And so I just was like, you're welcome.
Yeah.
And so I had to take that as a win, because it was, me knowing the context of what was going on and the people involved and what the things they like, the things they don't like. I was able to pull that into a real life situation and get really good feedback from an unexpected place. And I love that example. Like, that still lives with me. And it's like, that's kind of what it's about, just helping people out and giving them context and sending them on their way. And sometimes you hear about the outcome, sometimes you don't, but that's kind of the essence of what we do, right?
I love that. I think that's such a powerful example of really, again, like using your power for good. And like what we were talking about, building positive social capital, that person guaranteed by you doing that, you completely recast yourself in a whole different light in their eyes. And they actually saw your value. They saw your utility in terms of how you can positively impact and influence them to look good in their role. And at the end of the day, most people want to look good, right? They want to amass credits for themselves. They want to gain favor. They want to be well received and respected. So if you can show them that you have the ability to help them in that goal, I mean, that absolutely brings positive PR to you as an executive assistant. And I was, it reminds me, like I was taking a reference call for a very high level assistant just last week. And I was speaking with two of her former CEOs who both lead, really, really impressive, well-known companies. And the thing that both of them said about her and what they really, really valued in her over the years was her ability to really read the room for them and, be that advisor. And I think that when people see you in that way, when they see that you're, because let's be honest, most executives, I mean, there are exceptions, but most executives, that's not first and foremost, front and center for them is kind of the health and well-being and state of mind of their direct reports. It may be, but it may not be on their radar. They may not see that somebody is struggling. They may not see that somebody is, checking out. They may not see that someone's going through a hard time. They may not see that someone's at risk of, maybe taking another role or leaving the company. So to the extent that you are like that observation deck for your executive, right? And you're
love that part of the role, by the way.
Right? Yeah. Like you're walking the floor. You're the observation deck. So I think like these, and again, that's not on the job description. You're not going to see that, but that's part of it. Right. And so if people see that, wow, like Kristine was the one looking out for me on that. And all of a sudden they had a really, fruitful conversation with their boss. Reading between the lines, they know, wow, maybe Kristine had something to do with getting me that time that I needed, or maybe this thing that happened that was positive for me had something to do with what Kristine said, because I know I had that conversation with her and she's a bug in so-and-so's ear. Again, like when they see how you have influence and impact on the course of how things evolve for them, they begin to see your value, and your value is no longer, oh, she just moves meetings around. I'm not really sure why they keep her around. Aren't there apps that do that? It's like, but when they start to see it's so much more than that,
Right.
I think all of these things in aggregate, right? It's all of these good acts amplified over time consistently, but that all raises the brand for everyone, for yourself,
Exactly.
but for the entire, like, for the entire industry. Like, it's, really, like, this is, let's not be short-sighted about the stakes here. Like, the stakes are huge. The power of your role and the impact that you leave and the impressions that you leave, that extends to your fellow executive assistants, right? Create that positive impression and it will carry forward.
Absolutely. And I think the good thing about podcasts like yours and others is that we're giving people the dialogue. I always think about Brene Brown and how she talks about, giving people words to describe certain things. These types of podcasts give people dialogue as to how to talk about their jobs in an intelligent way, and how to provide perspective and scope and realize the impact. And we have to get out of seeing our roles as a tactical function, because that is so little of the job. Like, the tactical stuff, I could do it with my eyes closed. It's the soft skills that a lot of people don't have that we do.
Right.
And it's so valuable. And so I'm happy to kind of play a part in giving people that dialogue, learning how to talk about this. When you're going to go for your next raise, learn how to amplify yourself. Use words you've read or that you've heard in a podcast. And,
exactly.
No, they don't need to know where you got it from.
Yeah, no, they don't at all. And I think that one takeaway that hopefully everyone can hear from this episode, as they're thinking about up-leveling themselves and shoring up their positive PR, is to think about your role. Challenge yourself to think about yourself and your role, not in a reductive sense and not in a reductive point of view, but in an expansive point of view. What are all of the ways in which my role extends outward? And what are all of the ways in which I touch different facets of the organization, and all of the ways in which those streams or whatever, result in better outcomes and possibilities for the people that I influence and impact. Right. Don't think of yourself in that reductive way, but think expansively.
Exactly. And then part of that too, and I find this challenging even for myself still to this day, but when companies put out their data on growth and all of these bits of information, you have to use that for yourself as well. If you're an EA supporting a department that grew from 3,000 people to now 5,000 people, that's a big win for you too. That's not just for your boss. That's not just for the company. You've played a part in expanding all of that, and you can use that information for yourself too.
100%. So I know we just talked about how you as the individual need to really take charge of this dialogue, and I still believe that. But I'm curious if you've ever reached out to an executive for support with that and said, hey, Joe Schmo, like I'm just having I'm having a heck of a time getting so-and-so to cooperate on XYZ, or I just feel like, they're not prioritizing my requests and they take weeks to get back to me, and it's really becoming a bottleneck in me getting this done for you. Like, have you ever had to have that type of conversation where you've invoked your executive to help you with this?
Not that situation specifically, but I have had my boss help telescope my value. So I had a new chief of staff position that was not only new to the company, but it was new to that specific department. The unique thing was that I had colleagues that were on 6 different continents. So there were people who hadn't even heard of a chief of staff title before. Titles that are known here might not be well known in other parts of the world. So there was a lot lost in translation. I had to have a conversation with my boss to explain that he needed to tell his direct reports and anyone that he worked with on a regular basis what the scope of my role was, so that those people would then understand that I was speaking and acting on his behalf. And even after he did that, I still spent the first few months of my position talking through the specifics of my role and the types of things that I might be handling, because again, people have stereotypes. They get that tunnel vision and they think, oh, well, you do this. But then you have another conversation and then it's something completely different. Oh, well, you do that too. What all do you do? And it's like, well, can't really put my finger on just one thing. It's a lot of different things. So yeah, that took months to talk through. But it did start. I mean, it did start with me telling my boss, look, this is new. You can't expect people to understand right away. You need to let them know. And sometimes I would say, hey, you need to reinforce. You need to remind them this is part of my job. And so that if I'm talking to them, they need to treat it as though you're talking to them because I'm an extension of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. So I have a final question for you, Kristine, which is, if you had the opportunity to support anyone in the world throughout the course of history and time, who would you choose to support and why?
Herb Kelleher, who was the co-founder of Southwest Airlines. He was the first person I ever read about that embodied everything that I always thought was possible in business, even before I knew anything about the business world. He challenged the status quo. He created this epic, globally known culture. He put his employees first because he knew that if you treated them well, they'll do the same for the customers. And he was absolutely right. And he did all this while being a servant leader who had this insane sense of humor and believed in having fun. You just don't see CEOs who have that mindset. And so to me, he's just the ultimate person. There's a book that was written, probably 25 years ago. It's called Nuts. It's all about the start of Southwest Airlines and their growth, and heard a lot about Herb Kelleher himself. But I remember there's so many stories in there about how he remembered his employees' names at all levels. He could be on a ramp at an airport, and he remembers the guys helping to load the luggage onto the plane. I mean, what kind of CEO does that? Like that was just things like that were mind blowing. And then the big thing for me is that he believed in hiring for attitude because he knew skills could be taught, which is something that I've always believed in. But, appropriate to this podcast, the number one thing that always stuck out in my mind, and like I said, I read this book more than 25 years ago. I think it came out, it was a long time ago. He promoted his executive assistant into leadership positions within the company because, he saw she was incredibly capable, and he took her everywhere that he went. He took her with him. His assistant's name is Colleen Barrett. She eventually became the first female CEO within the airline industry, and a very successful one at that. Like, she was leading Southwest Airlines when 9/11 happened, and Southwest was the only airline to be profitable in the quarters following 9/11. Nobody else was. Because,
Wow.
we all remember what happened there, and air travel took a big hit. They've remained profitable, and she was in charge of that. So anyways, I always remember all that about him. And I've always elevated him into like this pedestal of just the ultimate person. And so I would absolutely love to have worked for him.
Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't know any of that. That is way cool. And I love the story of him promoting his executive assistant to ultimately being the CEO.
That's the one thing I've always loved.
That's wild. Yeah, no kidding. I got like goosebumps when you said that. Well, congrats on your new role. We wish you all the best with that.
Thank you.
And
I'm excited.
Thank you again. Reach is brought to you by Maven Recruiting Group, who specializes in placing executive assistants and support staff to the Bay Area's most prominent executives and companies. If you've enjoyed being part of our podcast community and are interested in becoming part of our candidate community, we're currently hiring for roles in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles. You can visit us at www.mavenrec.com to see some of the roles we're currently working on and to submit your resume.